So you've all just heard from the Minister of Education, and he made some really important remarks about how what we want for our students is not only for them to learn to know, but we also want them to learn to do and to learn to be, if I understood you correctly. That we want for them to have a life of meaning and to find meaning in their education. And I completely agree with his thoughtful sentiments in that regard. And at the same time, I'm here to tell you that I also believe that our traditional classroom, as we know it, is obsolete. And that in fact, there's a compromised position, because what we're now approaching is a new model that is in fact more capable of providing meaning and more capable of deepening learning and more capable of inspiring the human soul than the traditional model can. And so to get there, I want to start here. And that's with the fact that 200 years ago, the best way for us to cross the mighty ocean was on a sailing ship. And so shipbuilders specialized in building tall ships with billowing sails to carry us across the vast ocean. The problem with the sailing ship, however, was that occasionally there was no wind, and so the passengers couldn't move. And some passengers spent day after day stuck at sea, dying of scurvy and starvation, because there was no way for them to get across the ocean. The invention of the steam engine was a great boon to the shipping industry, because it allowed us to move in the absence of wind. And by the early 1900s, every major sailing ship company was out of business. There's a similar story unfolding today in education. For the past 100 years, the best way that nations have known for educating all of their students with a free public education has been through the factory model. The traditional classroom is an invention of the industrial era. It's based on the factory. The idea is to group students into batches and assign them to a single teacher who delivers a roughly standardized lesson for all of those students. At the end of the year, they're moved through and the next batch is pulled in. The problem with that model, however, is that for some students, in essence, there is no wind to power their sails. The lesson doesn't connect. It's too hard, it's too easy, or it just does not connect in a way that makes sense for those students. And so they are literally stuck, and they are figuratively dying of boredom or frustration because the model does not connect. Blended learning is like the steam engine. Blended learning is when brick and mortar schools replace traditional lectures with online lessons. One benefit of blended learning is that it's inherently modular. Students can swap in one lesson and swap out another with relative ease. And so because of that, students can get the right lesson at the right time and in the right way. That's something that the traditional model simply cannot replicate. Let me tell you a bit about Jack. Jack is a 10-year-old student at a relatively affluent school in the Western United States. And Jack hates math. He is no good at math. And if he were to stay on that trajectory, he would have been placed in vocational education and never had the opportunity to overcome his perceived weakness. But Jack's story took a different turn. His school placed him in a blended learning program, where for 70 days, he did half of his math course online each week, with half of his math course face-to-face each week, with a face-to-face teacher, and then half online, using Khan Academy, which is a free platform that offers over 5,000 micro-tutorials and mini-lessons in math. And Jack was persistent. He watched some of those mini lessons 10, 11, 12 times. And they started to make sense. And he started to do better. And this blue curve that you see is Jack's progress over those 70 days. He started at the bottom of his class, and by the end, he was 4th from the top. He just needed a tool to allow him to have the right lesson at the right time and in the right way, even in repeat as necessary, until he could master the content. I wholeheartedly agree with the minister's observation that in the past, the aristocrats had access to that type of personalization. But who only wants it for the aristocrats? We need a way to allow for the type of individual tutoring and that sort of personalization for everyone, not only for the wealthy aristocrats. And that's why this moment in history is profound. It's because we now have technologies that can help us scale that opportunity to more people so that others can benefit from the richness of a one-on-one tutor-like experience. Blended learning, the idea of face-to-face combined with technology enablers that enable personalization, is the simplest, most convenient way the world has ever known for tailoring lessons to the individual needs of students in a way that's scalable so that others can enjoy that advantage. Blended learning is also more capable of deepening learning. How do we make learning meaningful? How do we make it applied? How do we not only know to know, but learn to do and learn to be? Blended learning is a significant contributor to answering that question. Let me tell you about Dr. Eric Mazur. He's a physicist at Harvard University, and he likes to ask this question. Stop for a moment and think of something that you're very good at. Ideally, something that's related to your profession. Now, how did you become good at that thing? Was it by listening to a lecture? Was it by reading about it? Was it by practicing it? I would suspect that for many of you, it was by practice that you became good at that specific competency. So Dr. Eric Mazur had that same realization, and he thought, if my students can consume the content of my lecture prior to coming to class, then why are we spending class time going through the content of my lecture? And so he flipped his classroom so that now his physics students do the lesson prior to class. They watch it online or somehow consume it before coming to class. And then that frees up class time to discuss the content, to apply the content, to deepen the instruction. So that question is relevant for all of us. If now the content is available, more or less, at the click of a button, then what is, after all, the best use of face-to-face time? How do we use that precious time with our teachers to deepen the learning, to expand the learning, to apply the learning, to analyze the learning? It's a question for all of us. And finally, blended learning, in my mind, is just more inspiring to the human soul than was the traditional classroom. Not only am I a researcher, but I'm the mother of 5 young children. And 4 of them attend a blended learning school called Acton Academy. And at Acton Academy, they spend the morning doing online lessons where they master their core skills. And because the lessons are online, they can get just the right lesson at just the right time and in just the right way. There is an inherent efficiency in that delivery model for them. And because of that efficiency, it frees up the afternoon for them to deepen the learning, to apply the learning. They learn to program Lego Mindstorm robots. They learn to turn seeds into vegetables. They learn to paint large murals. They engage in Socratic discussions. They engage and master in the art of debate. They practice athletics. all of these opportunities to deepen and expand upon the learning that just weren't available to them in a traditional classroom that's tethered to the pace of that single teacher. So let me ask you this. If you were a parent, what would you prefer for your children? A school more like the factory model of the past, or a school more like Acton Academy? It's hard to break from tradition. We've enjoyed these traditional classrooms for years now. But as I look towards the future, as a researcher and as a mother, I can tell you that I am excited for children who will have experiences that are more personalized to where they are. I am excited for teachers who will have the tools that allow them to deepen the learning for each student in their classroom. And I am excited for schools that are more inspiring to the human soul than the factory models that we have today. So let's work together to build those opportunities for our students, to empower our teachers, and to develop those schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Heather. As I was listening to you, thought crossed my mind. I'm sure that most of the people in this room would answer your question in a positive way, that they would like their kids to go to a better school in terms of having blended learning available. Whose job is this to do that? In your experience, is it the government's job for public schools to introduce that, or is it a market-driven thing that parents or communities should be leading the way?
I think there's two parts to that excellent question. On the one hand, I think in the grassroots, as a people, we can do a lot, regardless of policy. Many teachers who have the technology find that they can flip their classrooms without a lot of assistance from the government. That's only true in pockets where there's the technology available. Oftentimes, as I've observed blended learning roll forth across the world, it's started by what we call the coalition of the willing. Teachers who see the opportunity, who want to deepen learning, who want to personalize learning, and so they take the initiative and find pockets of opportunity. One excellent place to get started is in what we call an area of non-consumption. Non-consumption means that the alternative is nothing at all. So suppose that your school does not offer, say, a course in Arabic, or a course in advanced physics, or whatever it might be. That's a wonderful place to get started with a new model, because you're competing against nothing, and so you can incubate it and it can get better. Simultaneously, governments can do a lot to free up innovators in their people. And the number one thing they can do is to stop looking at regulating the inputs, all of the ways that schooling has to be, and instead start to regulate the outcomes we want from our students. How do we want them to be? What do we want them to know? What do we want them to be able to do? And as we start to regulate those outcomes and hold schools strictly accountable to them, but free up the inputs, that leaves a lot of room for innovation.
Thank you. Thank you, Heather, for this inspirational talk, and I'm sure that many people will agree with you on what you said. Thank you.